He had spent years trapped in the hum of fluorescent lights and the endless hum of office machinery, feeling the slow erosion of his energy and his sense of purpose. Every morning felt the same. The alarm jolted him awake, a ritual of dread rather than motivation, a call to action that he didn't want to answer. He wore the uniform of compliance and ambition alike, yet neither brought him satisfaction. Each meeting, each spreadsheet, each small success seemed hollow, as if he were merely moving pieces on a board that didn't belong to him. The world outside his office window, bathed in sunlight, hinted at freedom, adventure, and a life he could barely imagine. He knew there had to be a different path, but the map to it was buried beneath the societal expectations that had been drilled into him since childhood. Late at night, as he scrolled through forums and watched travel documentaries, a seed of possibility began to take root. People were living entirely different lives, escaping the routine without losing stability or security. They were working less, earning more, and, most importantly, controlling their own time. The idea that he could reclaim his hours, design his day around experiences instead of obligations, and create streams of income that operated independently of his physical presence sparked a thrill he hadn't felt in years. He imagined waking up in a small villa in Bali, sipping strong coffee as the ocean stretched before him, knowing that his email inbox and his bills were no longer chains, but tools he could manage from anywhere. The first realization that shook him was harsh and oddly liberating. Most of what he did in the office, the long hours, the endless reports, contributed little to his actual goals or happiness. Tim Ferriss called it the relative value of time, but in his mind, it became something more visceral, the clarity that he had been giving the most precious resource he had to tasks that didn't matter. Every hour spent in that cubicle was an hour that could have been spent learning, traveling, creating, or simply living. And once he truly saw that, a fire lit inside him. The fire of impatience with the ordinary, the unacceptable, and the status quo. He could no longer convince himself that busyness equaled productivity, or that discomfort and overwork were marks of virtue. He started experimenting quietly, almost secretly, with the principles he had read about. He began with elimination, ruthlessly assessing what in his life actually produced meaningful results and what was merely noise. Email chains that demanded his attention but offered no strategic benefit were archived without guilt. Meetings without agendas, conversations that added no value, obligations imposed by tradition rather than necessity, all were shed like heavy clothing. At first, it felt like rebellion against authority, but soon it became empowerment. He noticed that when he focused only on the few things that mattered, the 20% of activities that yielded 80% of results, his stress diminished and his energy surged. Life became quieter in a way that was astonishing, almost unsettling, but undeniably freeing. With the fog lifting, he began to explore automation. The mundane tasks that had consumed so much of his days, scheduling, basic research, routine correspondence, could be outsourced. Virtual assistants, once a novelty he considered extravagant, became indispensable allies. By delegating repetitive work to skilled freelancers across the globe, he was able to multiply his productivity while freeing mental space for creative thinking and strategic planning. The first time he received a perfectly drafted report from halfway across the world while he sipped coffee on his balcony, he felt a mix of disbelief and euphoria. Time was no longer something that ran through his fingers uncontrollably, it was a resource he could shape, allocate, and protect with precision. This newfound mastery over his environment and attention unveiled deeper insights about the nature of work itself. Most people were bound not by necessity but by convention. Fear of judgment, fear of risk, fear of the unknown. Tim Ferriss's framework didn't just offer a way to escape the office, it provided a philosophy of liberation. The concept of mini-retirements, living intermittently as though life's joys didn't have to wait for old age, became a lens through which he viewed every decision. What if he could take a month off every year, not as a rare luxury but as a structural element of his life? What if travel, learning, and personal growth could be woven into the fabric of his existence instead of postponed indefinitely? The idea reshaped his mental landscape, replacing dread with anticipation, confinement with possibility. Even as he experimented, there were setbacks and doubts. Fear whispered persistently, warning of financial ruin, professional judgment, and social scorn. Friends and colleagues were skeptical, their questions heavy with incredulity. "Isn't that irresponsible?" they asked, or, "That's not realistic for most people." But each small success, a successfully outsourced task, a profitable side project, a day spent fully on his own terms, eroded the power of fear and replaced it with confidence. He was no longer blindly following a path, he was carving one deliberately. And the more he acted, the more he realized that freedom wasn't just an external condition. It was a state of mind, nurtured by discipline, strategy, and courage. His mornings began to feel like openings in a novel he was writing in real time. Each sunrise brought choices, and each choice brought consequence. He was learning to negotiate his own value, to reject tasks that didn't serve his goals, and to demand compensation that reflected his true worth. He discovered that wealth, when measured in time and experience rather than merely money, became a tool for joy instead of anxiety. Small victories accumulated, an email automated, a task delegated, a trip booked with confidence, and they compounded into a transformation that was as psychological as it was practical. He felt lighter, sharper, and more attuned to life's possibilities, as if a veil had been lifted from his senses. And yet, this journey was not merely about efficiency or profit. It was about confronting the internal narrative he had inherited from society, one that equated busyness with virtue and suffering with success. He began to understand the subtle ways culture had trained him to tolerate dissatisfaction, to defer dreams, and to ignore the quiet urgencies of the heart. By questioning every assumption, by testing reality against his desires rather than social norms, he experienced a profound sense of agency. Every experiment, no matter how small, sending a delegation email, taking a day off without guilt, negotiating a remote work arrangement, became a lesson in reclaiming his life. He realized that true freedom demanded more than simply trimming the excess. It required building structures that worked even when he wasn't looking. Income that depended solely on his presence was a cage disguised as opportunity. He began experimenting with automated business models, seeking ways to decouple time from money. Each idea was tested with meticulous care, launched on a small scale, evaluated, and either scaled or discarded. There was exhilaration in this process, a rush that came from testing boundaries and proving, in real time, that the world could operate differently than he had been taught. Small victories, a product sold while he slept, a service handled by a virtual assistant on the other side of the globe, became proof that independence was attainable. As he refined these systems, he also learned the art of selective ignorance. The bombardment of daily information, the constant chatter of news and notifications, had previously dominated his attention, dictating moods, actions, and fears. He began to cultivate what Ferriss referred to as a low-information diet, intentionally filtering out irrelevant news and avoiding unnecessary inputs. The result was clarity. Where once he had been reactive, responding to every ping, every headline, every tiny obligation, he became proactive. He made decisions based on impact, not habit. He chose focus over frenzy, simplicity over complexity, and in doing so, his energy multiplied. This was also the point when he confronted fear head-on, in both subtle and dramatic forms. He questioned assumptions ingrained since childhood: the necessity of a long commute, the sanctity of a corporate ladder, the social expectation to grind endlessly. The inner voice of doubt was persistent, whispering of failure, ridicule, and loss. Yet each small success against that voice, each calculated risk taken, diminished its power. A simple phone call to negotiate an early exit from a contract, a bold pitch to a potential client, a test run of a remote work arrangement, each act rewrote his internal story. Courage, he discovered, was not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it, a disciplined willingness to act despite trembling uncertainty. Travel became the proving ground of his new life. He didn't wait for retirement to see the world. He embedded experience into the present. Many retirements weren't vacations in the traditional sense. They were immersive life experiments. Living in different cultures, learning local rhythms, adapting to new environments, and observing how life unfolded outside the narrow confines of office cubicles transformed his perspective. Each journey offered lessons in efficiency, perspective, and creativity. He noticed how environments shaped energy, how simplicity could magnify satisfaction, and how minimalism in possessions and obligations could amplify freedom. The world itself became both classroom and sanctuary. Relationships evolved as well. He began to surround himself with people who shared his emerging philosophy, whose values aligned with independence and curiosity. Conversations shifted from complaints about bosses or traffic to strategies for living richly in time, not just money. He discovered that by freeing his own time, he could give more attention and depth to the people he cared about. Friendships deepened, collaborations flourished, and he realized that human connection was richer when it was chosen, intentional, and not simply incidental to routine schedules. Emotional energy, once diffused by stress and endless obligations, became concentrated and potent. Even the mundane became subject to optimization. Grocery shopping, administrative tasks, and routine errands were no longer burdens to endure, they became systems to master. He outsourced what could be done by others, automated what could be mechanized, and handled personally only what demanded his unique attention. This disciplined approach, applied consistently, created an almost invisible web of efficiency that supported freedom without sacrificing productivity. He was astonished by the compounding effect. What felt like minor adjustments multiplied into hours, days, and weeks reclaimed, creating a life rhythm that was unrecognizable from the former grind. Amid these changes, he noticed a transformation in his internal dialogue. Anxiety and obligation gave way to anticipation and choice. Instead of dreading the day, he began to approach each morning with curiosity. Problems were reframed as experiments, mistakes as data, and obstacles as opportunities to refine systems. The shackles of cultural expectation loosened. His sense of self expanded. The world, once rigid and unyielding, now felt pliable, responsive, and inviting. He realized that the limitations he had accepted were largely self-imposed, sustained by fear, habit, and a lack of strategic imagination. By dismantling these internal barriers, he discovered a vitality and aliveness that had been dormant for years. Business strategies intertwined with personal philosophy in subtle but profound ways. He learned that pricing, product positioning, and the flow of information could all be leveraged to create leverage, to make every action count for more. He experimented with small bets, testing ideas that had minimal risk but potential for outsized impact. Each experiment, successful or not, provided insight into human behavior, decision-making, and the hidden drivers of productivity. The world of commerce became a laboratory where his theories of efficiency and freedom were applied, adjusted, and perfected. Lessons from one domain often illuminated solutions in another, blurring the line between professional experimentation and personal transformation. And as the seasons changed, he began to see his life in a new frame. He had crossed a threshold. The daily grind was no longer a mandate but a choice. Time, once slipping like sand through his fingers, was now a canvas for design, creativity, and exploration. He had learned that wealth without time was a hollow victory, that effort without autonomy was a subtle form of imprisonment, and that courage to experiment, combined with deliberate simplification, was the ultimate key to freedom. This revelation was not merely theoretical, it was a lived, visceral truth, palpable in each morning's calm, each focused hour, and each unplanned adventure that entered his life with vivid intensity. As he moved deeper into this experiment of life, he began to confront the invisible chains that had held him even in moments of apparent freedom. Money was not the only cage. Convention, expectation, and internalized guilt had dictated much of his behavior for decades. Each liberated hour revealed not just external possibilities, but internal ones as well. He realized that freedom was not something granted by circumstance, it was something actively constructed, meticulously nurtured, and fiercely defended. Decisions that once seemed minor, like how to structure a workday or whether to answer a particular email, became instruments for sculpting a life of intention. He learned to treat time as currency and choice as a tangible asset, each moment an opportunity to invest in personal richness rather than societal approval. The process of lifestyle design required confronting fear repeatedly, in nuanced and often subtle ways. Each new arrangement, negotiating remote work, trusting a virtual assistant to manage delicate tasks, or experimenting with a product launch, felt risky until it succeeded. But success, when it came, was intoxicating, a quiet validation that the rules he had assumed were fixed were, in reality, negotiable. He started viewing risk through a new lens, not as danger to be avoided, but as a lever to amplify opportunity. The courage to act despite fear became a muscle, strengthening with every choice that prioritized autonomy over comfort. And as that courage grew, so did a profound clarity about his own desires, values, and priorities. Travel, once a rare indulgence, now became an immersive laboratory for understanding the world and himself. Living in unfamiliar places, navigating foreign languages and customs, and observing different rhythms of life taught lessons that no office or seminar ever could. He discovered how environment shapes perception and behavior, how simplicity can heighten satisfaction, and how detachment from the familiar encourages creativity and self-reliance. These experiences did more than expand his worldview. They reinforced the truth that life could be designed on one's own terms, that excitement and learning need not be postponed, and that comfort often masks stagnation. Each journey, each small adventure, added layers of resilience, adaptability, and insight to his evolving philosophy. At the same time, he became increasingly aware of how society trains individuals to tolerate mediocrity and delay dreams. Cultural norms had long equated busyness with virtue, suffering with legitimacy, and deferred gratification with wisdom. By systematically questioning and dismantling these assumptions, he realized how much of his previous stress had been self-imposed. He observed that many people accept limitation as inevitable, and in doing so, they lose the ability to experiment with alternative ways of living. For him, this recognition was liberating and daunting in equal measure. Liberating because it revealed the true potential of life beyond obligation, daunting because it demanded courage and commitment to pursue it fully. Relationships shifted under this new paradigm as well. Time freed from unnecessary labor allowed for deeper, intentional connections. Friendships and collaborations became selective, centered on mutual growth and shared curiosity. He noticed the subtle difference between relationships maintained out of obligation and those nurtured by choice. In choosing his companions deliberately, he created a social ecosystem that supported his vision of freedom and experimentation. Emotional energy, once diffused by routine and stress, was now concentrated, allowing him to engage with people in ways that were meaningful and sustainable. Conversations became richer, advice more candid, and support networks more aligned with his evolving philosophy. Business and creativity intertwined seamlessly, each informing the other. By adopting small, low-risk experiments, he tested products, services, and ideas while observing human behavior, decision-making, and market dynamics. What had once been work became an ongoing series of playful experiments with tangible impact. He applied the principles of leverage. Small efforts amplified through strategic outsourcing, automation, and selective focus yielded disproportionate results. He became adept at identifying tasks that were critical versus trivial, eliminating the latter with precision and delegating what could be handled more efficiently by others. This discipline and execution created the foundation for a life where work existed to support freedom rather than consume it. Every experiment, every adjustment reinforced a growing sense of agency. He began to see life as a canvas rather than a conveyor belt, where choices shaped not just days but identity itself. The discipline to eliminate, automate, and liberate created not monotony, but expansive possibility. Each decision that honored his priorities over convention strengthened a feedback loop. Success increased confidence, which fueled bolder experiments, which in turn generated more freedom. Even minor victories, receiving a flawlessly executed task from a virtual assistant, optimizing a process that once consumed hours, or completing a project without unnecessary stress, felt like milestones in a deeply personal evolution. He also discovered the subtle psychological transformations that come with living intentionally. Stress became manageable, anxiety became data, and challenges became invitations to refine systems rather than threats to well-being. The process revealed a profound truth. Life does not require constant activity to be meaningful, nor relentless struggle to be successful. Instead, deliberate focus, experimentation, and courage produce results far greater than mere effort. He could observe patterns in his own behavior and in the world around him, leveraging insight for both efficiency and fulfillment. Every choice became a test of values, and every result informed further refinement. Even the simple act of saying no took on profound significance. Previously, obligations had been accepted reflexively, driven by fear of judgment or the desire to maintain appearances. Now he exercised discretion with intention, rejecting tasks that did not serve core objectives, and prioritizing the work, relationships, and experiences that amplified life. Each refusal strengthened his autonomy, each acceptance aligned with purpose. The mental clarity gained from this practice was staggering. The hours reclaimed, the energy preserved, and the opportunities accessed were beyond anything the conventional path had ever offered. Freedom, he understood, was both external and internal, requiring mastery over time, attention, and self-imposed limitation. He began to embrace the world as his office, a concept that once seemed impossibly abstract but now became a tangible, exhilarating reality. Borders, time zones, and office walls no longer dictated the rhythm of his days. The laptop, once a tool for endless reporting and soul-draining tasks, transformed into a gateway. From a beachside cafe in Thailand to a mountain cabin in Spain, he conducted business as effortlessly as sipping morning coffee, watching waves or snowflakes instead of fluorescent lights. Each keystroke, each strategic decision, carried the weight of freedom rather than obligation. The environment itself fed creativity, inspiration, and a profound sense of vitality, turning work into an extension of life rather than a separate, burdensome construct. Mini retirements became more than a theory, they were lived experiences that reshaped his perception of time. Weeks spent exploring unfamiliar cities, learning new skills, or simply absorbing silence became exercises in clarity and renewal. He discovered that the pause was a potent catalyst, allowing insights to surface, stress to dissolve, and vision to crystallize. The world became both a playground and a classroom, offering lessons in efficiency, human behavior, and the art of presence. Unlike traditional vacations, these periods were immersive and deliberate, designed to expand perspective rather than escape routine. Each journey reinforced the principle that life need not be deferred, that the pursuit of joy, knowledge, and connection could coexist with meaningful work. The act of creating automated income streams intensified as he refined his understanding of leverage. He learned to build products, services, and processes that required minimal intervention once properly structured. Outsourcing became an art form, virtual assistants handling communication, freelancers managing tasks, and systems optimized for maximum efficiency. Each successful delegation freed mental space for high-impact decisions and experiences. Profit was no longer tied to physical labor or hours spent chained to a desk. It flowed from systems designed with intention, producing results even in his absence. This separation of income from time became the bedrock of true autonomy. Alongside these practical transformations, emotional resilience deepened. He faced fear, uncertainty, and occasional failure with a newfound steadiness, understanding that discomfort was an inevitable companion to growth. Each misstep, a delayed shipment, a miscommunication, a failed experiment, became data, a lesson in adaptation rather than a source of anxiety. Confidence grew not from perfection, but from mastery over process, perspective, and response. He began to anticipate challenges with curiosity rather than dread, seeing every obstacle as an opportunity to refine strategy and strengthen the system supporting his freedom. Relationships continued to evolve in remarkable ways. Distance, once feared as a barrier, now offered clarity and intentionality. He connected more deeply with those who shared his vision and values, while gently releasing ties that drained energy without purpose. Collaborations flourished as mutual trust and aligned goals replaced obligation-driven interactions. Even personal relationships benefited from deliberate attention and presence. Freed from constant busyness, he could engage fully, listen more deeply, and create experiences rich in meaning. The quality of time, he realized, mattered far more than its quantity. Daily routines transformed from monotonous repetition to deliberate choreography. Tasks were assessed for value, delegated when appropriate, and streamlined wherever possible. Systems handled the mundane, leaving mental space for creativity, strategy, and enjoyment. Even small habits like managing email or planning the day were approached as tools for liberation rather than chores. Efficiency became a habit, ingrained in every action, producing compounding results that magnified both productivity and satisfaction. The life he had once accepted as inevitable now felt intentionally crafted, responsive to his needs and desires rather than dictated by external pressures. He also discovered subtle psychological shifts that accompanied lifestyle design. Stress, once constant and numbing, became manageable and informative. Choices previously dictated by fear or obligation were now made with clarity and purpose. Every decision was measured against its alignment with personal goals, values, and the pursuit of freedom. He learned to anticipate distractions, mitigate unnecessary inputs, and prioritize experiences and tasks that amplified life. The mental space created by this discipline allowed for deeper reflection, creative problem-solving, and emotional richness, turning life itself into a deliberate act of design. In business, he applied the principle of selective focus to extraordinary effect. Only a small percentage of activities produced the majority of meaningful outcomes, and he ruthlessly prioritized them. Marketing, sales, and communication were optimized for impact rather than volume. Delegated tasks allowed him to concentrate on high-leverage decisions, magnifying both profit and personal satisfaction. The flow of work became elegant and purposeful, a series of deliberate actions rather than an endless struggle. He felt an intimate connection between creativity, strategy, and freedom, each reinforcing the other in a self-sustaining cycle. Fear and doubt remained, occasionally whispering that he had overreached or that society's rules would exact a price. But each success, each liberated hour, each adventure undertaken with intention strengthened a conviction that these whispers were echoes of conditioning, not truths. Courage became habitual, resilience instinctive, and choice an inherent part of his identity. Every step into uncertainty illuminated new possibilities, and every experiment reinforced the principle that life could be designed to serve freedom, fulfillment, and experience rather than merely survival. By now, the transformation was no longer experimental, it was fully embodied. The life he had once glimpsed in dreams, the mornings free of obligation, the days guided by curiosity and purpose, the knowledge that money was a tool rather than a tether, had become tangible, lived, and breathing. He observed a subtle but profound shift in perception. What had once felt urgent now appeared trivial, and what had once seemed distant now felt attainable. Each choice was filtered through the lens of personal freedom, each action measured against its ability to expand experience and reclaim time. The ordinary stressors of life, endless emails, rigid schedules, and shallow obligations, no longer dictated mood or self-worth. Instead, he moved deliberately, choosing engagement only where it produced value, growth, or joy. Yet, liberation brought its own challenges. Without the familiar constraints of office life or societal expectation, he encountered moments of disorientation and doubt. How should he structure his day without default routines? Which commitments were worth his time and which merely distractions? In these moments, he learned the subtle art of self-governance, balancing discipline with flexibility, structure with spontaneity. He discovered that freedom was not mere absence of constraint, but the careful orchestration of attention, energy, and intention. Decisions became exercises in creativity and strategy rather than reactions to external pressure. Each day was a canvas, and he was learning to paint it with a clarity and vibrancy that had been impossible under the old paradigm. His experiments in income automation and outsourcing reached new heights. By now, the systems he had built ran smoothly with minimal intervention, a network of trusted collaborators handling operations across continents. Each morning he would wake to updates, results, and data from remote teams, enabling him to make strategic adjustments rather than labor through repetitive tasks. The mental liberation from these processes was profound. The mind once consumed by logistics and minutiae could now roam freely, inventing, exploring, and creating. Every decision he made carried disproportionate weight, amplified by the structures he had meticulously crafted. He began to understand, with startling clarity, that the true value of wealth lies not in accumulation but in the time and freedom it affords. Travel continued to teach lessons beyond borders and cultures. Living in different countries revealed not only logistical and business insights but also psychological and philosophical ones. He observed how lifestyle choices, environment, and local rhythms influenced energy, satisfaction, and productivity. The contrast between cultures illuminated assumptions he had previously accepted as natural, revealing that many limitations were socially imposed rather than inherent. These experiences deepened self-awareness, teaching lessons about adaptation, humility, and the richness of human diversity. Each journey, no matter how brief, offered tools for optimizing life, from time management to cultural fluency, all reinforcing the principles of autonomy and intentional living. Relationships matured alongside this evolving philosophy. By consciously curating interactions, he discovered the exponential value of intentional connections. Time and emotional energy, once dispersed across endless obligations and shallow engagements, now flowed toward meaningful people and projects. The quality of relationships became a multiplier of happiness and fulfillment. He noticed how much energy is lost in maintaining superficial connections, and he intentionally invested in depth over breadth. Emotional intelligence grew as he learned to balance presence with detachment, support with independence, and attention with discretion. In doing so, he not only deepened bonds but also created a network of allies, collaborators, and friends aligned with his vision of freedom. Even daily habits were transformed. Simple tasks became rituals optimized for efficiency, productivity, and mental clarity. Morning routines set the tone, integrating exercise, reflection, and planning. Systems handled routine obligations, emails filtered, repetitive tasks automated, and communication delegated. The result was a mental space increasingly free from clutter, stress, and distraction. With these systems in place, his focus sharpened, creativity surged, and the sense of control over life intensified. He had learned that freedom is a product of deliberate structure, carefully designed processes that create maximum leverage with minimal effort. He also began to see the subtle psychological evolution that accompanies intentional lifestyle design. Stress no longer dominated the mind, but served as feedback for refinement. Mistakes were reframed as experiments, providing insight rather than anxiety. He cultivated patience and discipline, learning that sustainable freedom is achieved not through shortcuts but through consistent, informed action. The fear of judgment, financial insecurity, and social scrutiny, once powerful motivators of conformity, had been largely neutralized by repeated success and evidence of autonomy. Each experiment, whether in business, travel, or personal habit, reinforced confidence, resilience, and the principle that life could be intentionally sculpted rather than passively endured. At the heart of this transformation was a profound realization about value. Time, attention, and focus were infinitely more valuable than money earned through endless effort. By reallocating energy toward high-leverage actions and meaningful experiences, he could achieve outcomes far beyond what conventional labor could produce. The liberation from trivial obligations created a space in which creativity, exploration, and joy became the primary measures of success. Wealth was no longer a pursuit of accumulation but a tool for amplifying autonomy and life satisfaction. Each day became a test of alignment. Decisions that expanded freedom were embraced, while those that contracted it were gracefully declined. Even the act of saying no became an art form. Refusing low-impact obligations, unnecessary meetings, or tasks that drained energy became a source of empowerment rather than guilt. Every refusal strengthened autonomy, every acceptance aligned with intention. He learned to differentiate between societal pressure and personal priority, cultivating a life that reflected his true values. Clarity became a daily companion, knowing what mattered, what was urgent, and what could be delegated or eliminated. The accumulation of these choices created a life rhythm that was elegant, effective, and profoundly satisfying, where work existed to serve freedom, not the other way around. By now, the architecture of his life had taken a form that was almost unrecognizable from the days of fluorescent lights and endless meetings. The constraints that had once felt permanent had been dismantled with deliberate intention, leaving a space where freedom and creativity intertwined seamlessly. Each day was no longer dictated by obligation but by curiosity, priorities, and the subtle interplay of energy, attention, and impact. He discovered that true autonomy is not a single act of rebellion, but the accumulation of hundreds of small, deliberate choices, each designed to reclaim time, maximize leverage, and align life with authentic desires. The mastery of automation and delegation had reached an almost artistic level. Virtual assistants, freelancers, and digital systems managed the bulk of operational tasks with precision and reliability. He no longer measured his productivity in hours worked, but in outcomes achieved. A few strategic actions now yielded disproportionate results, and he could focus his energy on high-leverage decisions, creative experimentation, and exploration. The realization that income could flow independently of physical presence reshaped his understanding of work entirely. He felt unburdened, liberated to invest attention and energy in experiences and relationships that genuinely mattered. Mini retirements and global mobility became more than lifestyle experiments. They were transformative rituals. Living in new cities, observing foreign cultures, and adapting to unfamiliar routines provided lessons that textbooks and office corridors never could. He began to see the world through a lens of opportunity rather than limitation, each environment offering insights into efficiency, human behavior, and the art of intentional living. The unfamiliar tested resilience, deepened adaptability, and fostered an inner confidence that was unshakable. Life itself became the ultimate classroom, and every day provided exercises in resourcefulness, creativity, and perspective. The integration of work and personal fulfillment reached its peak. With systems in place to handle mundane or repetitive tasks, mental space opened for reflection, strategy, and creativity. He observed patterns in both life and business, leveraging them to amplify results with minimal effort. Mistakes were no longer sources of panic but valuable experiments. Successes were data points confirming the power of deliberate design. The rhythm of life, once chaotic and externally imposed, now reflected personal priorities, values, and ambitions. Autonomy became habitual, not exceptional, and the very act of choosing how to spend time felt revolutionary. Relationships deepened in unexpected ways. Freed from the tyranny of routine and superficial obligations, he could invest time, attention, and energy into the people who truly mattered. Collaborations thrived because they were chosen deliberately, aligned with shared vision and mutual growth. Friendships strengthened, not through frequency alone, but through presence, quality of engagement, and emotional availability. Even romantic and familial connections became richer, nourished by the capacity to be fully present and engaged. He noticed that freedom was amplified by connection. Autonomy did not require isolation but could coexist with deeply meaningful human interaction. The internal transformation was as striking as the external one. Anxiety, once a constant companion, now served as a guide rather than a barrier. Fear of failure, judgment, or risk became a signal to prepare, strategize, and act, rather than an excuse to remain immobilized. Self-awareness deepened, revealing desires, values, and priorities with startling clarity. Each choice became a reflection of intentionality, a test of alignment between external action and inner truth. Life became a dialogue between planning and improvisation, between structure and spontaneity, and between courage and calculated risk. He also understood the compounding power of marginal gains. Small efficiencies in workflow, communication, and lifestyle decisions multiplied into hours, days, and weeks reclaimed. Delegation, automation, and elimination were no longer mere tactics, but the scaffolding of a life designed for maximum leverage. The paradox became clear. The less time he spent on low-impact tasks, the more influence and productivity he generated. The systems he had built amplified creativity, freedom, and satisfaction, creating a feedback loop in which success reinforced autonomy, and autonomy enabled further success. Even the simple act of saying no acquired profound significance. By refusing obligations that did not serve his goals or values, he carved mental and temporal space for the pursuits that truly mattered. Social pressure, guilt, and ingrained habits no longer dictated action. Deliberate prioritization guided it. This ability to discern what deserved attention created a life of clarity, purpose, and momentum. He could now see how often individuals sacrifice freedom for conformity, and he felt a quiet gratitude for the deliberate rejection of that path. His life became an embodiment of choice, each decision reinforcing the principle that autonomy and fulfillment are inseparable. As his confidence grew, so did the scale of ambition. Projects once considered risky became opportunities to expand influence, explore new markets, and test innovative ideas. Every experiment reinforced the lesson that the world responds to action, creativity, and courage. By carefully leveraging resources, time, and talent, he achieved outcomes that would have been impossible under traditional models of effort and reward. The invisible scaffolding of his systems, digital, social, and psychological, supported increasingly bold undertakings, enabling a life rich in experience, accomplishment, and freedom. And ultimately, he realized that the most profound insight was the intrinsic connection between freedom, time, and life satisfaction. Money was valuable not as an end, but as a tool to shape experience. Work was meaningful not as a duty, but as a vehicle for exploration and growth. Relationships were richest when chosen deliberately and nurtured with presence. Each day became a canvas for intentional living, a space where choices, actions, and reflections converged to produce a life fully owned, fully felt, and fully alive. The realization was breathtaking. Autonomy was not a luxury or a dream, but a designable, achievable state. A life sculpted with intention, courage, and creativity. By this stage, the transformation was not just visible, it was tangible in every gesture, decision, and thought. Life had shifted from a linear sequence of obligations and compromises into a flowing, dynamic interplay of choices, experiences, and experiments. Each day was a testament to deliberate design, a manifestation of courage and intentionality. He had come to understand that freedom was not granted by circumstance but cultivated through action, reflection, and the careful orchestration of time, attention, and energy. What had once felt impossible, the disentanglement from societal expectations, the separation of income from presence, the mastery of autonomy, was now the fabric of his reality, woven from countless small, purposeful decisions. Even in moments of quiet, the scope of his achievements sank in. The mornings, once rushed and anxious, now held a serenity that felt profound in its simplicity. Watching sunlight touch the rooftops of a distant city or the waves lap a foreign shore, he realized that life's richness lay in presence and choice. Work was no longer a cage, it was a tool, a canvas, and an instrument of experimentation. Income flowed through systems he had designed, liberating his time without sacrificing outcomes. Each decision was deliberate, each interaction purposeful, and each experience approached with full engagement. The ordinary had become extraordinary through the lens of intentional living. He reflected on the psychological journey that had accompanied this transformation. Fear, once a controlling force, had been reframed as a guide and motivator. Anxiety had become data, mistakes had become experiments, and every obstacle had provided insight into both human behavior and personal resilience. He noticed the subtle shift in how he approached challenges. Uncertainty was no longer paralyzing but an invitation to innovate. Each success, each liberated hour, and each risk taken fortified confidence. Courage, he realized, was not the absence of fear, but mastery over it, and the willingness to act despite it. Through repeated practice, bravery had become habitual, embedded in the very structure of his decision-making. Relationships too had reached a new depth. By curating connections with intentionality, he had nurtured bonds that amplified joy, creativity, and mutual growth. Friendships and collaborations thrived because they were aligned with shared values rather than dictated by convenience or habit. Romantic and familial ties flourished through presence, attentiveness, and deliberate choice. The quality of human connection, he understood, was inseparable from the freedom to engage fully. Emotional energy, once scattered across superficial obligations, now flowed into relationships that mattered, creating a sense of richness and intimacy that reinforced the larger architecture of his life. The paradox of choice had revealed itself not as a source of overwhelm, but as a tool for empowerment. By designing systems that filtered inputs, delegated tasks, and optimized routines, he navigated life with clarity and purpose. Every yes was meaningful, every no, protective, and every experiment informative. Time became the ultimate currency, and he spent it on experiences, people, and ideas that multiplied satisfaction and growth. In this rhythm, he discovered the profound truth that freedom is not a single moment of escape, but a state cultivated through structure, experimentation, and deliberate prioritization. Travel, business, and personal experimentation merged into a coherent, harmonious philosophy. Living in diverse cultures revealed the relativity of constraints and the universality of human aspiration. Observing and adapting to new environments honed adaptability, resilience, and creativity. Automated income streams freed attention for reflection and exploration, turning work into an ongoing experiment rather than a burden. Relationships flourished under the principles of intention and presence, reinforcing both emotional richness and practical support. Each element, freedom, work, travel, connection, and experimentation, intertwined seamlessly, producing a life of vibrancy, autonomy, and fulfillment. He realized that the most valuable currency in life was not money, influence, or status, but time and the ability to direct it with intentionality. Wealth was only meaningful insofar as it expanded freedom. Work was only valuable if it supported purpose rather than consumption, and human connection was deepest when chosen deliberately rather than by default. Every system he had built, every boundary he had drawn, every habit he had optimized reinforced this principle. Life had become a reflection of choice, courage, and clarity, a continuous act of design that harmonized freedom with purpose. Even the quiet moments held resonance. The feeling of a sunrise over an unfamiliar city, the satisfaction of a smoothly executed system, the joy of deep, unhurried conversation, all became markers of the life he had intentionally cultivated. Fear and doubt were still present, but now they were measured, manageable, and instructive rather than paralyzing. He could move through uncertainty with curiosity, leverage challenges for insight, and savor experiences without distraction. Autonomy was no longer aspirational, it was habitual, natural, and deeply embedded in the fabric of daily life. In the end, the true achievement was not financial success or external recognition, but the mastery of time, attention, and intentional living. He had learned that life is most fully experienced when every choice is deliberate, every action leveraged, and every moment embraced. The liberation he had sought was not a distant reward but a lived reality, available to anyone willing to experiment, simplify, and prioritize freedom. Courage, clarity, and deliberate design had created a life in which work, play, and personal growth coexisted in harmony, producing not only achievement but also profound fulfillment. And in the quiet reflection that followed, he felt it deeply. The paradox of effort and reward, of action and autonomy, had been resolved not through endless toil but through design, courage, and imagination. Time, once stolen by obligation, was now wholly his. Work, once a source of stress, now amplified freedom. Relationships, once scattered and shallow, now nourished the heart. The life he had envisioned, once abstract and distant, had been realized through patient experimentation, relentless simplification, and the unwavering commitment to live intentionally. The world was vast, possibilities infinite, and he was free to explore, create, and savor every moment, fully alive in the masterpiece of his own making.